Excellence, Mesdames et Messieurs, veuillez accueillir nos conférenciers, le député Randy Boissonnault, Minister Maryam Monsef, Minister Kirsty Duncan, and MP Alaina Lockhart.
Well, good morning, everyone. How are you today? Comment ça va, tout le monde? Is this the group that didn't party so late last night? Hey, vous êtes tous sages. On est très content de vous voir aujourd'hui. Everyone, it's a great pleasure to be with you here today. I'm honored to serve as the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre. I'm the first openly gay MP elected from Alberta, and I serve as the Prime Minister's Special Advisor on LGBTQ2 issues. It is a great honor to be here with such distinguished colleagues, and you have heard each of them introduced, and I'm going to turn things over to colleagues very quickly, but let me just share with you something that we know as Liberals, which is that diversity is our strength. And as you've heard the Prime Minister say numerous times, we are stronger because of our diversity, not in spite of it. And permettez-moi de partager avec vous quelques indicateurs de notre diversité. Just very quickly, 22% of Canadians were born outside of Canada. Notre taux de bilinguisme est le plus haut de notre histoire comme pays. 1.7 million Canadians identify as having Indigenous ancestry. We have 13% of our population identify as part of the LGBTQ2 community. 1 in 7 Canadians identify with a disability, and yet we know one thing, fellow Liberals: privilege is invisible to those who have it. Privilege is invisible to those who have it. And our job as Liberals is to extend that privilege and that prosperity to more people. And we know there's a lot of work to do. You can applaud for that. Just on gender wage gap alone, women earn 88% of what men earn. That's not right. And we have work to do. And my colleagues who are here today will help us understand what we're doing as a party and what we're doing as a government to have more accessibility for persons with disability, more access for Indigenous Canadians, for LGBTQ Canadians, make sure that women take their full place in our society. And so let me start by asking the minister, a dynamic minister of status of women, the MP for Peterborough, Minister of State for Status of Women, to share with us all that went behind from the party to the budget for this amazing 2018 gender equality budget. Maryam.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Liberals. You have had a good night's sleep, I hope. You have woken up early, and I want to say that you are the reason why our party not only got elected, but got elected based on the understanding that equality is a driver for economic growth. I would like to acknowledge that this very lovely convention center is built on the territory that the Mi'kmaq peoples have called home for generations upon generations. It is a privilege for settlers like me to be in this space with all of you and to also be part of an era of reconciliation in this country. So I'm from Peterborough, Kawartha, as our wonderful moderator said, and the inclusion that I felt within this party began when I was considering my run for federal office. And I'm not the typical candidate. My riding has never elected a woman before me. I am, at the time, young. I am Muslim. I came to this country as a refugee, and I didn't really have any political experience beyond grassroots activism in my back pocket. And the party and my EDA embraced me with open arms. And those values of openness and acceptance and recognizing that diversity can be a source of strength, I see them in the cabinet room every single day. I see it within our caucus every single day. And I see it in the conversations that liberals have amongst one another, but also I see the impact it has on the international stage. Canada, for 150 years, never had a gendered lens applied to its budget. Not to go out of our way to favor one group over another, but just to understand how does our spending and taxing affect different people differently. What does it mean for women and men and gender diverse peoples? What does it mean for people living in rural and urban communities, indigenous and immigrants, persons with disabilities and exceptionalities, seniors, young people? If we don't take these factors into account in a country as diverse as Canada, we don't actually make the full leverage that we can of the people who can build this country into something even better. After 150 years, the first intersectional gendered lens was applied to Budget 2018. We're spending differently, and it won't be the last time. We're going to be legislating it so that this is applied to all subsequent budgets. What does this mean? It means that Canada, in an era where the actual war is a war for talent, is going to be going out of its way to find all the ways we can to bring different peoples to circles of power and influence so that we can lift people out of poverty, so that we can keep them in the middle class, so that we can ensure that decisions that are made by people who represent all our realities and not just a subsection. I was in Davos for the World Economic Forum with the Prime Minister. And at first, when I was asked to join that delegation, I thought, what on earth could I offer these people at the World Economic Forum? And then I got there, and I realized that about 20% of the attendees of the world's most powerful and wealthy were women. Very few were persons of color. Very few had visible disabilities or exceptionalities. And then I started hearing people talk about why embracing equality, gender, and other is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. They were talking about how those who want to compete for good talent need to be more inclusive. And suddenly, the international stage was starting to sound like my party. It was starting to sound like my prime minister. And that is the power and the potential of Canada. And this is why all of us work so hard knocking on doors in really hot weather, in rain, why we go out of our ways to bring people who haven't considered politics before into this circle, because this isn't just about making things better for Canada. This is about ensuring that Canada is also leading on the international stage, and this is the party that I'm so proud to be a part of.
Thank you very much, Minister. Another part of Canada's snapshot is that we have 22% of Canadians who indicate that they belong or they are visible minority. And so one of the things that we've been working on as government is supplier inclusion. Did you know that the Government of Canada is not only the country's largest employer, but that we're the largest procurer, that's a tough word, buyer, purchaser, of goods and services. And yet it's really difficult for women entrepreneurs, for queer-owned businesses, for Indigenous businesses, for people with disabilities who run companies to have access to those billions and billions of dollars of public tenders. And so one of the women who's working very hard on this in her portfolio, along with Minister Qualtrough, is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Small Business and Tourism, who also happens to be the Member of Parliament for Fundy Royal, Alaina Lockhart. Alaina, would you share with us what you're doing in your portfolio?
Well, thank you, Randy, and I'm honored to be here on the stage with my two colleagues who are contributing so much. My three colleagues, excuse me. Randy, you're included too. So great to be here this morning, and yeah, great to be here with the hat of small business on. And for any of you that don't know, my background is as a small business owner, and I worked away in my community in that role, and also involved in the community. And it really was this movement that drew me in as well. I wasn't an overly political person, but I saw where we were going as a country. I was inspired by our leader, inspired by the other people that were stepping up, and decided myself that, you know what, like every man that came before me in Fundy Royal, I felt like I could make a difference as well. And that's one of the questions that people ask me all the time. Why did you get involved in politics? That's the reason why. I thought I had something to contribute. And I'm proud that we're here in an inclusive room like this, where people do feel that they can come forward and get involved in this, because it really is all of your voices that are really driving what we're doing as a government. So for small business and specifically procurement, we were very excited to, in Budget 2018, for there to be a $1.6 billion commitment to a women's entrepreneurship strategy. And what I found in my work, traveling across the country, is that my own experience as a small business owner really is a thing. There's only 16% of all businesses in Canada that are currently owned by women. And of those, they're predominantly smaller businesses with lower growth that aren't exporting and don't have access to procurement. And that really is what our strategy is focused on, making sure that we're giving business owners the access to capital, to the training that they need, to procurement, and to the networking that they need as well. Because women do things a little bit different. And that's exactly what this budget is about, recognizing the fact that we all have something to bring to the table, and that if we maintain the status quo in all of our systems, we won't see the advancement that we want to see. So we've set an ambitious goal of doubling the number of women business owners in Canada by 2025. So we're currently at 16%. We want to get to 32%. And a big piece of that is going to be accessing procurement. And you can't underestimate the power of procurement. I'll tell you a little story. A couple of summers ago, I was here in Halifax and actually went out on one of the Navy ships. And there was myself and a representative from the Army, and we were having a sit-down meeting, and we had some cheese and crackers there. And so the Army guy, the Navy guy, and myself, and the Army guy says, "Geez, you have the same cheese in the Navy as we have in the Army." And I said, "Well, you know what? You have the same cheese in the Navy and the Army as we have in the House of Commons. So it's a pretty big contract, this cheese contract." So we can't underestimate the power of those procurement contracts and the impact that they could have on women in business. So, you know, as I travel the country and talk to business owners, women, Indigenous businesses, one of the things that they tell us is that they are really looking for mentors. And what's amazing to me is that quite often, they don't recognize that they themselves are the mentor. They're the person that has gone ahead. They're the trailblazer. They've learned the lessons, and they have a lot to share. And that's one of the things as women that I think that we need to do more often, is recognize that we do have those skills, those learned lessons that we can share, and to really mentor each other and bring each other along. And I'm very proud that we have a strategy that's working towards doing that.
Thank you very much, Alaina. So the work that our government and our party are doing on economic growth are not just important because they're the right thing to do. They're important because they're fundamental to people's dignity and to be able to putting food on the table and to making sure that youth and seniors and everybody who wants a job can have a meaningful job in this country. And if we could ensure that women participated fully in the marketplace, it could add as much as 4% to our GDP. Think about that. We chase 0.1% of GDP for growth. We're happy to have 2.5% growth. Imagine what we would have as a country with 4% more GDP. And then add on to that LGBTQ Canadians and Indigenous Canadians and persons with disabilities. And to talk about all of the work that we have left to do on the file of persons with disabilities, I would like to turn the microphone over to my colleague, the Minister for Science, and also the Minister of Sport and Persons for Disabilities, who happens also to be the dynamic Member of Parliament for Etobicoke North, Kirsty Duncan.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. C'est un grand honneur d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. It is a great honor to be with my absolutely tremendous colleagues, and more importantly, to be with all of you, our liberal family. Let me say thank you. Thank you for all you do in your communities, for all you do for our country. We are most grateful. And Randy, I want to say thank you to you for the work you're doing with the LGBTQ2 community. It is having such an impact in my own community and across the country. I am so proud to belong to a government that focuses on gender equality, on reconciliation. I am hoping we can start a conversation where we put persons with disability and accessibility, that we put the same emphasis. We have to start this national dialogue. More importantly, we have to make culture change. All of us need to be champions here in this room, here in our communities, at our workplaces, of how we include everyone. I go across the country and I talk to young people, I talk to as many people as I can, and it's always the same thing. If a person has a disability, they say I'm the only one in the room putting my hand up and saying, accessibility, accessibility, accessibility. We all have to be champions. Canada will be a stronger country. Andy, to your point, it's not just the right thing to do. It's about building a better Canada. There is also an economic argument, as you say. If we include persons with disabilities in the workplace, it's an increase to our GDP of 1.3 to 1.9% annually. We all need to be champions, and I would ask that you stand with us. We are going to bring forward the first federal accessibility legislation in Canada later this spring. This is really exciting. It will help where we have federal jurisdiction. Provinces like Ontario and Nova Scotia and Manitoba already have legislation. Legislation won't do it all. It really is about creating culture change, working together, and noticing when people come into my office, what they say is, when you go to the grocery store, it's a 1-hour trip. When I go to the grocery store, I have to think, who are going to come in to look after my children? There's a 2-hour window for the transport to pick me up. I have to think about what store is accessible, and there's a 2-hour window to come home. It is a 5-hour shopping trip. So let's include everybody. Canada is at its best. Society is at its best when we include everyone.
Wow, thank you very much. As a proud Alberta MP and Alberta Caucus Chair, I'm going to give a special shout out to Inclusion Alberta, that's been doing this work for over 60 years and led the country in creating inclusive access to students in the post-secondary system, and having Dr. Florzone on the stage before this. I think it's important to celebrate leadership and trailblazingness wherever that comes from in the country. So hats off to Inclusion Alberta. And if your university or post-secondary is not yet accessible to persons with disabilities, then reach out to me, reach out to Inclusion Alberta, and we will help you make that the case.
And Randy, can I just pick up on that? I think in bringing forward this accessibility legislation, we have to recognize that this is decades of work by the community, decades of work by Canadians just like you. And this is their legislation, and let's celebrate the road that we've gotten to here, but that there's more work to be done.
Absolutely. And what I want to do is turn over to colleagues now to literally riff off of anything that we've said already. But before that, I want to share with you a conversation. I want to get real, because you face this on the doors. You face this in your communities, and members, people in this room will have faced this themselves. So let's talk about overt discrimination and how, as a party, we can end that. So I am avoiding the Edmonton winter for a couple of weeks. The year is 2012. I'm in Argentina. I hear this voice, and I know it's a person from the business community in my city. I go and say hi. We have lunch the next day. Turns out to be a very nice Argentine lunch for about 2 hours. And I confide that I'm thinking of going for politics. And then at some point, I refer to my partner, and this senior member of the Edmonton business community says, "Wait a second, you're gay?" I say, "Yeah." He goes, "And you're francophone?" "Yeah." "Well, why don't you take your French gay self back to Montreal where you came from, because you don't stand a snowball's chance in hell of ever winning in Edmonton Centre." Well, the lunch kind of took a turn for the interesting. Here's the punchline, folks. My family never came from Montreal. We came from outside of Quebec City. But in 1891, my family had been in Alberta for 126 years by then. So I took that as fire. I took that as fuel. And I told my team, we used that. 3 days after I won, I went and found a rainbow card that said, "Thinking of you," en français. Ça dit, "Pense à toi, je pense à toi." I opened it up and I wrote, "So looking forward to seeing you for lunch soon. All my best. Member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre, Randy Boissonneau." So, and I had this young trans woman at Ottawa, at Carleton the other day saying, "Does anybody ever come up to you and tell you to turn it down?" And I'm like, "Zab, buzz off. Don't hide your light under a bushel. Let people see who you are. And if we could all just be who we're meant to be, then we would all be that much better." It was never an issue for me to be openly gay as a member of the business community in Edmonton. It should not be an issue to be a woman or a queer person of color or a person with disability or somebody from a visible minority. And that's party, friends, where we need to get as a party and as a country, and that's why we need your help.
Yes.
So Maryam, how do we go from policy to politics? How do we go from politics to policy to the kind of budget we saw this year?
So it starts with people like the people in this room. May I ask, if you're able to, raise your hand if you've been to more than 10 conventions. Raise your hands. Okay, there's like 10 hands that's gone up. Thank you. You have created the bedrock for this party. Raise your hand if you've been to more than, to at least 5 conventions. Raise your hands. So, okay, that's about 1 in 5. Raise your hands if this is your first convention. My goodness, welcome. So what's at stake here is what I'd actually like to talk about, Randy. It's wonderful that Canada's leading economic growth in all G7 countries. It is such a blessing for people across this country that our unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in some 40 years since we started keeping track of these numbers. It is such a gift to have a prime minister who's out there on the international stage and here at home openly and proudly talking about why he's a feminist, why equality matters. It is such a privilege to be part of the first federal cabinet in the history of this country to not just be gender balanced, but include a diverse range of experiences and voices around this incredibly important table. But as Patty Haidu, my predecessor, said, none of these rights are actually carved in stone. Whenever there's been progress, and I'll use gender equality as an example, whenever we've seen progress for women and girls, we've also seen backlash. We saw backlash when we got the right to vote. We saw backlash when we entered the workforce in significant numbers. And we certainly see backlash now that there are so many of us, so many more of us, in politics. Just look at any woman in politics, in leadership positions, social media feed, if you'd like to see what that backlash looks like. In order to be able to withstand that backlash, we have to have evidence that inequality exists, and equality itself is good for the economy and the society. In order for us to continue our work, we need to recognize that it won't just get done in 3, 4, 5, 6 years. That there are forces actively mobilizing, actively fundraising, actively strategizing to take back all the hard-won gains that this movement and many others have been responsible for. It is up to us, those of us who have the privilege to be in rooms like this, to stand up and stand strong against those forces who are trying to take Canada to a place that it should not go. The world is counting on us to do right by those peoples who have not had power and privilege like that which we experience today. So how does this work continue? It's through the work that you do day in and day out. It's through the courageous conversations that you have with us when we could be doing something better. It's through the work that you'll do when you reinforce the good things that we do so that we keep doing it. It's all the ways that you'll stand up for people who cannot yet stand up for themselves, and it's for all the ways, and I'd say this is the most important, Randy, it's all the ways that we stand united as one party when those forces recognize that the best way that they can undo our progress is by dividing us.
We will not be divided. Right, Minister? Right, Liberals? We will be united. I know I'm doing a good job in the House the louder the Conservatives heckle me when I'm doing a member statement. Minister Duncan, in maybe 2.5 minutes or less, why is the Naylor report so critical, and how do we get more women in STEM?
Thank you, Randy. Fellow Liberals, we had a historic budget for research and science this year. The largest budget for Canadian research in Canadian history. $4 billion. We had the largest investment in discovery or fundamental or basic research in Canadian history. That's it. I'm a former scientist who happens to be a woman. I'm what I was known for many years ago. I led an expedition 500 miles from the North Pole. I took a team of 17 men, a research team. They were the leaders in their field, and we exhumed 6 bodies to look for the cause of the 1918 Spanish flu. 17 men. Do you think it had some challenges? When I was at the university, despite being one of the top researchers, and one of the top professors, I was paid in the bottom 10th percentile. I was asked when I planned to get pregnant at a departmental meeting. Well, that was before I entered politics. When I took on this role, I didn't expect to go across the country and hear those same stories across the country. So I decided to take action. We've brought back statistics. So we actually have evidence of how women and Indigenous peoples and persons with disabilities and people from minority backgrounds are doing at the universities. We have this prestigious research chairs. They're called the Canada Research Chairs. And there have been voluntary targets since 2006. And when I looked at the numbers, we were doing worse than we did in 2006. I believe I said the numbers were dismal. And I challenged our universities to do better. Well, the latest round of those Canada Research Chairs, the highest percentage of women ever nominated. And with the Canada 150 research chairs, 58% of women nominated. The point is, we've made it part of our mission to change the numbers, and with your help, with the help of the universities and Canadians, those numbers are changing.
Amazing. Fantastic. Alaina, a constituent asked you why we needed a gender equality budget, and what did you say in response? Can you set that up for us? 2 minutes or so?
Sure. Yes, I was speaking with a constituent the other day that actually was quite upset that we were investing $1.6 billion for women in women entrepreneurship. And I was struggling with what the problem was with that. His perspective was that women were doing just fine and we didn't need to do anything about it. You know, that's pretty hard to argue that point when we know that only 16% of businesses are owned by women, and that something systematically must be happening, that women are in businesses with lower growth, lower numbers of employees, and that sort of thing. So we had a bit of a conversation, and he kind of thought his perspective was that every time we lifted a woman, we were pushing down a man, which was also a little hard for me to swallow as well. But I said to him, he said, why would you do a budget that has such a gender lens on it? You know, why would you do that? When, you know, we also have such large numbers of men, obviously, in society as well. And I said, well, you know what? You had the first 150. And I don't think this one, this looking through a gender lens, is really going to hurt that bad. So that was our conversation.
Great answer. Fantastic answer. Friends, we have to work in this together. This is incumbent upon us to get this right as a party. And I learned something in the wings, because there are many of us here in this room that have been to multiple conventions, as Minister Monsef showed us by hands. But one of the reasons that there's so many new people here is because this party has changed. Our approach to welcoming people to a convention has changed. I remember going to conventions where it was a shout fest. I remember going to conventions where it was overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, and a lot of gray hair in the room. And that's nothing against those people who are our seniors today. We have made space for people. We need to continue to make space for people. And that's what growth is all about. And let me share with you that this includes, and I am proud to be one of the caucus economic champions for Minister Philpott for Indigenous. I sit on the Indigenous caucus as a non-status adopted Cree person, and I can tell you that 40 MPs have stood up to be caucus champions. The majority of them want to do work on the economic file, and this is everything from the urban Indigenous strategy to working with economic development organizations on reserve, because we must, the Indigenous population is the fastest growing population in Canada, and we must create more space for everybody. So colleagues, if I may, let me share an anecdote that'll wrap us up about what motivates me to get up every day, and I think what is at the heart of what we're trying to do here. And the wisdom comes from a 2-year-old. So I got to go to Oxford last year. I got to go to a panel. I got to go back to my alma mater. And as I was on the coach heading into Oxford, there were pride flags, rainbow flags from every one of the colleges, on the high street, everywhere. And I was like, what is going on? Turns out it was Pride Month for all of the universities in Oxford. This was not the Oxford I was used to in 1997, where I was so deeply in the closet, you didn't find a rainbow flag within 500 miles of me. And I got to go for brunch, and my friend Imogen brought her 2 boys, Benjamin and Sevi. And at one point, Sevi and Imogen had been walking around, and he said, Mommy, what are all those colorful flags? And she spent 20 minutes explaining to her 2-year-old what the pride flag meant, and then said, tell Mommy you understand what that means. And she looks at her and says, oh, of course I do. But his answer to what the rainbow flag meant to him floored her. And at brunch, she said, tell Uncle Randy what the rainbow flag means to you. And he looked at me with his big brown eyes, and he said, all the peoples, tous les peuples. If a 2-year-old can get it right, so can our party, so can our government, and we must not rest until we have served all the peoples. Merci à vous tous. Thank you all very much.